100,000 years ago, there were at least 6 different human species on the planet. Now there's only one. Us. These are some of our long-lost relatives. Except for a small amount of inbreeding, we wiped them out. It's fascinating because Neanderthals were not only bigger than us, their brains were larger as well. Individually, they'd physically overwhelm us and likely outthink us too. Fossil records suggest as we left Africa and first encountered the European Neanderthal, we were beaten and retreated. 30,000 years later, we returned to face the Neanderthal again. Something had happened in that time. We'd developed an evolutionary trait. What was it? What allowed us to succeed in the battle for dominance and conquer the world?
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Great, thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
This amazing propensity for social mimicry leads to copying, cults, cultures, religions. It allows us to come together in much greater numbers. It allowed us to overwhelm the Neanderthal and ultimately dominate the planet. Yet this propensity to mimic and follow can be our downfall too. Also, please don't mistake this social mimicry as an indication that we're cleverer than other primates. Take a look at this.
There's an assumption among many of us that the brain of a human can outperform anything that a close relative like a chimpanzee can do. But that's been overturned by this remarkable study that adds to a lot of research that brings chimpanzees closer to humans than would have been thought 10 or 15 years ago. Here's a chimpanzee being taught how to count. It's all the brainchild of Tetsuro Matsuzawa at Kyoto University. Now here's the same task, but it's slightly trickier because they're going to cover up the numbers very quickly and ask the chimpanzee to remember the right sequence. Now this is actually the offspring of I, who several years ago was the first chimpanzee who learned how to use Arabic numerals and really pioneered this remarkable effort by Prof. Matsuzawa on chimp cognition. Now it's the turn of a human guinea pig, a university student. They've only got 5 numbers to get the right sequence after they've been covered up. They start off pretty well and then not very good, and oh dear, can't remember that. And of course when they get it wrong, the test ends and is repeated all over again, and really not a very impressive performance. Now it's back to the chimps doing the same task, and they're incredibly good. In fact, it kind of makes your jaw drop just seeing them in action here. And this is because they've got remarkably good working memory compared with human beings. So, in the battle between university students and young chimpanzees, chimps won, humans nil.
It's eye-opening. If I were to ask you as well how you might improve your ability to perform this task, you might tell me about the benefits of practice, relentless practice. That's how we've been conditioned, all the way through school, university and beyond. Keep practicing, honing our skills. Yet if we carried on making the task harder, perhaps including more numbers, covering them up more quickly, we may expect to see an increasing failure rate. Over time, we might expect to see an increasing failure rate just like this. Except this is actually the annual adverse event rate in the UK. This phenomenon repeats across the world. Australia, the United States. Every day, our workplaces increase in complexity with new drugs, new equipment, and a constantly renewing workforce. The greater the complexity, the greater the risk of error. If the interventions we put in place to deal with these errors only further add to more complexity, more policies, more alerts, more forms to fill in, then we design our hospitals to increasingly fail. In 2016, the British Medical Journal reported medical error as the 3rd greatest cause of death. Let's just stop for a minute. Think back to the chimpanzee video and think that as well as training people to be as good as they can be, why don't we also make the task easier? Imagine how much more successful we'd all be if the numbers remain uncovered. Why didn't we suggest this earlier? Make it easier to perform the task. This is what ergonomics is about. It's about designing our environments, of which we humans are an inextricable part, in order to make it easier to succeed. However, making success easier doesn't appear to be well supported in healthcare culture. Why? It was an experience with Shigamodex that drove me to a deeper understanding of the problem with healthcare. For it's only through understanding something that we can truly fix it. Shigamodex makes success easier. The combination of high-dose rocuronium and Shigamodex provides the ability to rapidly paralyze at an equivalent onset time to suxamethonium. The ability to paralyze for as long as required, providing optimal conditions for surgery, and the ability to rapidly and reliably reverse paralysis at any stage. Shigamodex provides the confidence to give larger doses of rocuronium, making mass ventilation and intubation easier more quickly. Yet in a culture which doesn't support things being easier, Shigamodex can be vehemently resisted. It takes away a competitive edge. In fact, I've heard some anaesthetists claim that using it is cheating. At one of my hospitals, we used to have Sugammadex readily available on our anaesthetic trolleys. Then one day the head of department decided it should be locked away in recovery. I went through all the appropriate channels to get it back where it was needed. A lot of obstacles were put in the way. Cost. Innovations often cost more to introduce at the front end. Extensive cost-benefit analyses in healthcare, almost impossible to perform. Show me the evidence. Another great barrier to positive change. Supplied with all the evidence, a cost-benefit analysis, deep discussions, manoeuvring. Eventually, it was voted back in through the executive committee. However, in response, the departmental head, who was against its return, resigned his position. In order to coax him back, Sugammadex was kept locked away. It still is. Then I was called into a room with the medical director, and for an hour was threatened and bullied. At one stage, the director pointed at me and said, "I don't care who you are or what you do, but if you ever do anything like this again, you are out." It was then that I realized we don't stand a chance. We'd be picked off one by one in an industry which is too ashamed to change. And all the time, patients will suffer through lack of access to optimal care. I realized then that if healthcare is to improve, we need to work differently. So what's going on? Humans don't resist change. If I was to offer you a lottery win of millions of dollars, you'd most likely accept it. What we resist is a positive loss. Loss of importance of a skill set, the years honing the ability to time reversal with neostigmine. Loss of authority through accepting suggestions for improvement from lower in the hierarchy. A negative gain. In accepting we've resisted an initiative, we need to accept we've put lives at unnecessary risk while waiting. And shame. This shame of change tends to impact most on those in positions of influence. Shame. Shame has been described as a fate worse than death. One reason for the removal of this medieval form of punishment was that while it seemed fairly benign to be put in stocks, the shame associated with it was so profound, some people committed suicide afterwards because they'd been disowned by friends and family and lost their jobs. Those in positions of greatest influence may fear the shame of change the most. They may dig their heels in even further. It's interesting to see how this can then affect the dynamic of whole departments, hospitals, a whole industry, healthcare. Well, this is David. David is an intelligent individual. He may even be the head of his department. The circle represents all of David's knowledge about an issue. The rectangle represents all the possible knowledge and thinking about it. This is David's department. They've all followed a similar career path, topped exams through school, competed all the way, been conditioned through medical school and through their specialty training. They all think in a similar way, and without realizing, without accepting it, they can miss the bigger picture. This is the ideal pattern of thinking of an intelligent team. Diverse thinking, a wealth of ideas spread across the individuals within the group. Unfortunately, because of our dominance hierarchies, we often end up with a team which parrots the most authoritative figure. To do otherwise within healthcare can put one's own career and livelihood at risk. Well, I'd found this out the hard way. For healthcare to improve, we need to understand ourselves better, understand the human in the room, accept our limitations. We need to design our environments, the systems we work in, to get the best out of us. We need to acknowledge our herd mentality and design not only our physical environments, but also our governance structures to accommodate for this. We need to transition from our dominance hierarchies and adopt alongside them teams of networked teams, encouraging diverse thinking and ideas to be shared. Given the right conditions, we'll thrive, and we'll thrive in the right way. Through working together, we can create the best environment for patient care. Because as my 7-year-old daughter points out, we're actually pretty smart.
According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be at the right place. The rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole.
Yet what if I told you you read the top line wrong? And as a result, a patient died. We work in a high-risk industry. Information about what happened would be passed up a chain of command, far removed from the event, and there'd be meetings. There may be a root cause analysis. We may create a policy or education program, or send out an alert reminding staff to read the sign properly. We may do all of these and expend a lot of energy and money in doing so, and we will have wasted our time, because another doctor or nurse will come along and read the sign incorrectly, and another patient will die, because what we should have done was changed the sign. Ergonomics is about designing the workplace and the equipment in it to accommodate for limitations in human performance. It's about changing the sign. Are there thousands of lives to be saved simply through respecting and designing for our human limitation? I believe so, and we needed a way to get the message out.
After heart disease and strokes, medical error has been reported as the third biggest cause of death globally. The exact figure is difficult to estimate because error reporting in healthcare lacks transparency. But mistakes made in hospitals are leaving patients worse than when they went in. A group of medical staff decided enough was enough and began to agitate for change. Communication errors have been identified as the root cause of the majority of mistakes. Staff in operating theatres can work with hundreds of different colleagues between multiple hospitals, and their faces are covered. So in the midst of an emergency, precious seconds can be lost when clinicians don't know or can't remember the names of their colleagues, which can lead to lack of accountability, wrong equipment used, wrong drugs administered, and so on. To improve communication and reduce mistakes, the answer was remarkably simple. To immediately identify individuals and their roles, we began writing our names and roles on our scrub caps. It was a simple act which changed the culture of the theatre from anonymous to collaborative. Suddenly, it was easier to coordinate, to be more accountable and efficient. With the help of a hashtag, the idea began to take off. Medical staff globally joined in. Some even started printing their own name caps. The world sat up and took notice. What started as a simple idea among a bunch of so-called rabble-rousers has grown into a game-changing movement which is saving lives around the world.
It costs nothing to implement. It's obviously better for patient care. So why isn't it already the norm? Surgeons only know 44% of staff names in their operating theatre. Not surprising when we realise as humans we're very poor at remembering names. Name and role caps increase name recall, reduce confusion, and increase the propensity for staff to speak up. They improve communication, morale, teamwork, and ultimately improve patient outcomes. So if it's not evidence or cost preventing us from displaying our names, what's the most likely thing which will lead us to make this positive change for patient care? Seeing others do the same. Our social conformity. Something else interesting is this group. Healthcare workers who will only accept this obvious improvement to patient care if it's made mandatory. Who are these people? What I hope you'll realise is that while this group is relatively small, they're extremely influential. They can stop us from doing something the vast majority of patients want us to do, and the vast majority of frontline staff want to do too, particularly those new to healthcare. So what stops us from doing something we want to do, we know is right and is obviously better for patient care? Fear. So what is it we fear the most? Perhaps we fear most for our careers and those who impact on them. However, these people appear least likely to accept ergonomic change. Top-down structures nurture competitive conformists into positions of power. Are these the people we pander to as we compete against one another? Because this is what we've been nurtured to do, all the way through school, university, and beyond. Suggest something which gives us a competitive edge, and we welcome it with open arms. Even when it costs millions of dollars and 15 years of evidence and 4,000 studies indicate it's of no benefit to patient care. Yet suggest something which takes this competitive edge away. Shigamadics, name and roll theatre caps, and they may be aggressively resisted. Driving positive change in healthcare stirs up so much emotion. Perhaps it's impossible, given the culture we exist in. But then, fortunately for us, an even lower hanging piece of fruit came along. Anaesthetist Dr. Jen Dixon from Melbourne, Australia tweeted this just 2 years ago. Confusion about the internal cardiac arrest phone number within hospitals. It differs depending on which hospital you're in. Standardizing this time-critical number provided a great opportunity to demonstrate how effective a network team approach can be in delivering change and improvement. We crowdsourced the data, finding at least 51 different numbers across Australia, and discovered elsewhere in the world others were trying to do the same. The UK standardised at 2222 10 years ago, and there's a push to standardise throughout Europe and internationally. Dr. David Whitaker, the main driver behind this. So we introduced him to our Basecamp group, a project software platform allowing documents to be stored. Anyone in the group can pitch in at any time. We might, for example, work together on a message to send out further. This infographic sent out on social media. As well as social media, we've great links with mainstream media too. We hit the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. And all the time we continue to develop strong connections with healthcare governance. And within a year, we'd managed to achieve something which took the NHS twice the time and cost them millions. All this from a single tweet. Ripples of change become waves of improvement. We'd like to drive this change internationally and believe we can. But what is it that makes a hospital introduce change? Perhaps it's something social psychologist Malcolm Gladwell illustrates through this man. This is NBA star Wilt Chamberlain. In 1962, he scored 100 points himself in a single game of basketball, a feat that's never been equaled. What's fascinating though is Wilt made 28 points from the free throw line, another unbeaten record. Fascinating because Wilt was useless at free throws. However, the season before, he was persuaded to change his style and throw the ball from between his knees like this. His success rate took off. What intrigued Gladwell most was the following season, Wilt reverted to the regular overhand technique. His success rate plummeted. Yet despite this, he persisted with the overhand technique for the rest of his career and never had a high score again. In his autobiography, Wilt Chamberlain regrets reverting back, however felt he had to, because in his own words, he didn't want to be seen as a sissy. He put his own reputation first, and in doing so, let his team down. A trait which can be common to us all. Question is, would you let your reputation get in the way of doing the right thing? Or better still, Can we create a system which aligns our reputation with doing the right thing, which aligns our reputation with providing the best in patient care? Well, yes, we can, and we have. And it's been used with great success in driving emergency number standardization, displaying those hospitals which have standardized in green, those for which we've the details but haven't standardized in amber, and those for which we haven't received the details in red. Scoring in this way encourages transparency, a better score where the information's available. Where required, we can apply this technique to any project. Does your hospital support staff wearing their name and role? Does your hospital have a box of Shigemedex on every anaesthetic trolley? Does your hospital have a red stripe on the wall indicating where the arrest alarm is, improving time to effective resuscitation? Does your hospital provide video direct laryngoscopes in every theatre and promote their use first line for laryngoscopy? There are hundreds of similar initiatives to introduce which will make success easier. Just as domestic equipment has been rated for years, collaboratively we're able to rate the healthcare equipment and systems we interface with. Institutions given an aggregated score based on the systems in place. These scores give impetus for hospitals to improve and move up a league table. This is the Learning from Mistakes League, a subjective table based on frontline feedback. Working together, we're making this objective, driving safety improvements throughout healthcare. Working together, we'll change this and start heading in the right direction. When you next step foot in theatre, you make a choice. You can either carry on in the direction we've all been conditioned, away from improved patient care, or you can choose a different path, one which supports change and improvement. The choice we make is on our caps, and it's for everyone to see. Please, choose to be human and part of a team, and just imagine the lives you'll save. Thank you.